So welcome everybody. This is a webinar for, well, a panel discussion for World Menopause Day. And the theme of World Menopause Day this year is lifestyle medicine. So first, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Professor Joyce Harper, and I'm Professor of Reproductive Science at the Institute for Women's Health at UCL. And I've been working on menopause for many years, and it's been a real privilege to do that. And my co-host today is Nighat. I'll hand over to you, let you do your introduction. Are you on mute? Oh, you're on mute. We had to say it once.
Right, we had to say it once. Right, that's it. I've got it out the way now. It's only taken us a pandemic to learn. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr Nighat. I'm an NHS GP in Buckinghamshire and also a GP specialist in women's health. I'm the ambassador for Wellbeing of Women, which is a charity that looks at the whole lifespan of women and girls, and they're at the forefront of doing a lot of work in the menopause space, particularly running the Menopause Workplace Pledge campaign since 2021. And for the last year and a half, I have been secretariat to the Menopause APGG, which I'm part of, which has a report out later this month about menopausal experiences of women in marginalised groups. And in that vein, I'm also the co-founder of the Health Collective with Professor Dame Leslie Regan, who's the ambassador to the Women's Health Charity. I'm a health content creator, and you might have seen me on telly sometimes, or heard me at least on the radio, because I do a podcast with Naga Minchetti and Dr Christine Akechi called That Time of the Month.
Brilliant, brilliant. We do have a brilliant group of people today. I feel very, very humble in such great company of real experts to talk about these important topics. So Shema, I'm going to hand over to Shema to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing at UCL before we get really into our discussion today about lifestyle medicine. So Shema.
Joyce and hi everybody. Sorry, I've got a bit of an echo on mine. Is there anybody else?
Sounds okay.
We can't hear it.
No,
it's just me. Annoying. So hi everybody, my name is Shema Tariq. I'm Joyce, I've got to sort out the echo. I can't deal with it. Can I could you carry on and I'll sort this out.
Okay, well, we'll let everyone do their introductions. So, well, shall I hand over to our wonderful panel? And shall we start with Chris? So I'm going to let our panel do their introductions. So it's always a bit better. Chris, tell us who you are. We know who you are. But
yeah, Joyce, you correctly identified that we all hate listening to our own introductions, but we also hate doing them. I'm Prof Van Tulleken. I'm an NHS doctor. I'm an infection specialist at UCLH, and I do a couple of services there, and I particularly have an interest in marginalised populations, refugee and migrant health. In terms of research, I'm a professor of global health and infection at UCL, and I study food systems, particularly kind of the political economy of food systems and injustice in food systems. And but I also do some, I guess, molecular nutrition work, some sort of proper labby science stuff. And I'm a kids telly presenter, so I present a show called Operation Ouch on children's telly, and I do some broadcasting for grown-ups. And I wrote a book about food called Ultra Processed People, which I think is probably why I'm here. And I'm very honoured to be here, Joyce, and to be the man on this panel. It's very nice.
Yeah, I didn't think of that, but can I just say, if you read Chris's book, you'll never eat a Pringle again. That's always the statement I give. You will never eat a Pringle again. Right, we're going to hand over next to Aimee.
Hi, thanks, Joyce. So I'm Aimee Spector. I'm Professor of Aging and Clinical Psychology of Aging is a real mouthful at UCL. So I'm trained as a psychologist. I specialise in aging, and I've worked in dementia for many years, 27 actually, which makes me feel old, and have moved over to doing research on mental health and cognition and menopause in the last few years, having had my own near dementia diagnosis myself, which I will talk about shortly. So it's lovely to be here. And I also direct the UCL Menopause Mind Lab.
Brilliant. Nighat, do you want to introduce the last two so I don't keep talking? Our last two wonderful panelists.
Oh, so lovely to have Chris and Aimee with us. It's a real honour. Lauren, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Lauren Colenso-Semple. I'm a muscle physiology researcher with a specific interest in the interaction between ovarian hormones and the outcomes that we're getting from exercise. And so, should women be doing things differently than men? Does that change across the lifespan or not? And I also do a lot of science communication. So, I really try to facilitate the accurate sharing of knowledge between disciplines in topics that are particularly relevant to women.
Thank you so much. It's a great honour to have you. And Nerina.
I am Dr Nirina Ramlakhan. I'm a physiologist. I studied with Professor Joyce Harper many decades ago. Let's not talk timelines, okay? So back in the, yeah, shh. So I'm called a sleep expert. I'm called one of the UK's leading sleep experts. I've written 4 books on the subject. I also write about trauma and stress and burnout and resilience. I spent the last 30 years helping people to sleep. My work takes me into corporate environments. 10 years working at the Capio Nightingale Clinic, psychiatric clinic, so helping people with severe mental health problems to sleep. Working with women recovering from cancer at the Haven. And oh, let's just throw in Chelsea Football Club, just a little bit of shameless name dropping. But my passion is to help the world to sleep better. I have an approach which is practical, philosophical, psycho-spiritual, physiological, and lived experience, because as a baby, I couldn't sleep. And for 30 years, I couldn't sleep. And now I sleep really well. And I slept really well throughout my menopause as well by applying my tools. So looking forward to sharing today.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And also, I must say, thank you for giving up your evening, because this is actually sometimes the hardest. As a mother to 3 children, I find it very, very difficult. I've locked them away in a cupboard, not literally, just in case anyone's worried. I just want to check, is Shema going to come back in just to talk about the InTune programme? Shema?
Yes. Hi everybody. That's so much better. I felt like I was being shouted at by myself, which is the worst case scenario. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me. What an amazing panel Joyce and Nighat have been able to put in place. So my name is Shema Tariq. I'm based at UCL's Institute for Global Health, where I'm an academic who has been doing menopause research, I always say, since before it was sexy. So for at least 12, 13 years. I'm also an NHS doctor. I'm a consultant in HIV, and I founded and now lead one of the UK's largest HIV and menopause specialist services. And Joyce has asked me to speak to you today because I am, the best way to describe it is Joyce's partner in crime. I'm the more sensible partner in crime in our double act. So Joyce and I have been working together now for about 2.5 years. And some of you may know that we are trying to address the recognised problem that there is in accessing menopause information and support. So I think we all know that there's been an explosion of information about menopause. Some of it is great, some of it is less than great. There's a lot of misinformation around. There's also been a massive increase in the number of products that are being branded as being menopause related. So that could be supplements. I know, Joyce, you have your own thoughts about that. But also, I walked past Primark the other day and they sell menopause t-shirts. So basically, you can brand anything as being menopause related and sort of stick a couple of extra quid on it. So we're recognising that this is quite a tough time for women and other people with ovaries to be able to navigate this sort of environment where we're getting lots of information, lots of products sold to us. So 2.5 years ago, Joyce and I, recognising that, just thought, well, what can we do about it? We're both menopause researchers and we've been working in this field for a long time. I had just come back from 2 rounds of maternity leave, and I started reflecting on antenatal classes and what you get from antenatal classes. So those of you who've ever experienced pregnancy and been to a class, it's a mixture of getting evidence-based information that's done in quite a standardized way, but you receive that information in a group setting. And a key part of it is you form those connections with other people who are going through this big life change at the same time as you. So Joyce and I thought, well, what if we do the same thing for menopause? What if we normalise reaching menopausal age and going to, say, a local library and joining a class, and meeting other women going through, or other people going through the same thing. And that's where the seed of InTune was planted. Over the past 2.5 years, we have spoken to loads and loads of people, diverse groups of people, to just figure out what this project could look like. What could this program look like? We've done a survey of about 1,600 people from the UK and beyond, and we've hosted 2 really large workshops, which I know some of you on this call have attended. And we've now landed on InTune, which is, our aspiration is that this will be a national programme of menopause education and support. The key things about InTune is that it will be rigorously evidence-based, it will be unbiased. We have no hidden agendas. We're not going to make any profit out of it. The third thing is that it will be free to access. And that's important because if you have paid for menopause support and information, you just amplify the existing inequalities. And the final thing is that it will be inclusive. The other core principle is that everything we do is done in partnership with communities affected by menopause. So the programme is co-designed right at its heart. So where are we now? So we have 2 parts of this programme. We have Be Prepared for Menopause, which is a 1-hour session or 1 to 2 hour session that's aimed at people before they reach menopause, so they kind of know it's happening, because it's really hard to go and seek support when you don't know that that's what's happening to you. And that's being piloted across the UK at the moment by Joyce, who's travelling around the UK in her camper van. And then our second part of the programme is something called Be Supported Through Menopause. That's aimed at people who are experiencing menopause symptoms. We are currently in the process of trying to secure funding to do a large clinical trial across the UK, because we really want to build an evidence base to show that this kind of approach works, that's cost effective. And then we go back to the NHS and get it commissioned by the NHS. So yeah, lots of stuff happening, and yeah, watch this space. We're both really, really excited and committed to really bringing this seed of an idea into fruition.
Thank you so much, Shema, for giving us such an overall picture for those that might not have heard of it, or for those that are involved. Joyce and I have been involved from the beginning, and a lot of the work that we're doing at Wellbeing of Women and the Health Collective, mapping those marginalised groups. We've been listening to those marginalised groups, and we've been hearing their stories and what they want, because menopause it means so many different things actually to different communities. So the idea is that this is reflective, and as we said, it's free. And it means that communities are able to learn in places of safety, but also have places of trust as well. And that means that that education goes on, but it's always going to be backed with evidence-based science. So on that vein, this is why we wanted to get this panel together, because we're going to pick these geniuses on our panel, their brains tonight, so they can give us more information and more education. So we're going to kick off, as Chris has pointed out, he's the only man on the panel. So we're going to kick off with you first, Chris, and ask you this question. One of the biggest things is nutrition. Now, we know that that's becoming more and more talked about in different communities, but nutrition means totally different things to different individuals and different communities. How important is nutrition at all stages of our lives, but especially around the menopause stages?
So thanks, Nighat. When I was asked to speak about this, my instinctive reaction, like any male professor of nutrition, was to think that essentially nutritional needs were the same for men and women across the lifespan, and it was one size fits all. And so I had to go and look some things up. I have to say, Lauren has written some really great stuff about this, so I'm humbled to be on a panel with you. I think there are 3 there are 3 points I want to make. There are first of all, we can look at like the nutritional demands of women's bodies and men's bodies as being different, and not merely that women are generally smaller than men, or have different amounts of muscle mass, different body composition. And so from that, you can get to a point, and then we can look at menopause as a state where lots of physiological changes happen that I think other people on this panel are much more qualified to talk about than me. But you can make a case that certain nutrients you have an increased demand for. So there may be an increased demand for protein because you lose muscle, and for calcium. And you can make some case around that, and there's some published literature. I wonder if that takes us down a path of nutrient-based recommendations, all of which are very solid evidence. We can give men and women tables of dietary guidance that have good evidence for thresholds for salt and saturated fat and calories and fiber and protein. And one of the difficulties with these tables is that people find it very hard to calculate how much protein was in the cottage cheese that they had for breakfast, because they didn't weigh it all on a balance. And then they ate a banana in the middle of the day, and then they had a protein bar at the gym. And it's just very hard to keep track of every nutrient across the day. And then we have this thing called appetite, which means that even when we've eaten enough of a certain nutrient, we sometimes want more of it, or we want more of the thing that carries it. We may not go, we want more salt, but it turns out the thing we want to eat and that is driving us toward the fridge or the app on the phone is full of salt. And so I think one of the things that the science I've been involved with, and the community of academics I've been involved with, is a sort of different way of thinking about nutrition, which is saying that the package of the nutrition is all important. And I think no product exemplifies this kind of dilemma better than the protein bar. I think there is good evidence that protein broadly is pretty good for us up to a certain amount. And I think probably a lot of people believe that guideline amounts are a little bit low, and some people, particularly athletes and people as they age, could eat a little bit more than the guideline amount, maybe 1 to 1.2 grams per kilo of body weight per day. But it's very hard to work all that out, even if you're a nutrition scientist. So if you get your protein from different sources, it has really different health effects because it brings a load of other stuff with it. And so if you're getting your protein from the latest thing I found an article on yesterday was protein Pop-Tarts and protein Doritos, which have just been released. Yeah. Perhaps there isn't consensus, but I think many of us who study nutrition might say it's not controversial to assert that getting your protein to get yourself through menopause and beyond from snacks that are high in saturated fat, salt, and refined carbs may not be the best way of getting it. So the concept of ultra processed food has become much discussed in the last few years, and I think it's particularly it's a discussion that's really, really gendered, and I think the gendering of the discussion takes several forms. First of all, I think it's really important to understand the cultural violence that ultra-processed food has done to forms of our food culture that were really kind of discovered by women. So the way I would frame this, and that there are going to be men who want to object maybe to my simplification, perhaps women will as well, but humans are the only animals that eat what I would call food. Other animals eat just other animals and plants. Food has been specifically prepared for the purpose of consumption. And broadly, humans eat this incredible diet where all kinds of different foods have been developed and processed in a way that preserves their nutrition, and makes them palatable. And they nourish not only individual bodies and families, but also communities. And broadly, that work has been done first around hearths, maybe 1 million to 500,000 years ago, and then in domestic huts, and then in kitchens. And broadly, this was cultural knowledge, incredible diverse cultural knowledge, basically developed by women. And transnational food corporations have not merely displaced these foods from our diet, they have one of the forms of violence is that this knowledge is being destroyed around the world. It's been destroyed in the UK. We have many communities who, for multiple generations, really their ability to cook has been taken away from them. This hasn't been a decision. And so I see that as a very gendered act of cultural destruction, especially if we think about mainly the people who were developing the foods that have taken over our diets. They were developed in research labs, in large corporations, and they've proved to be very palatable. They've been marketed very aggressively. And I think it's very clear we can discuss any individual food is very difficult. But when we look at a dietary pattern, in the UK now, 60% of our calories come from ultra-processed food on average, and 80% in many settings, especially in young people. And we're sure, I would say, there is pretty good consensus that dietary pattern is harmful in many different ways. Whether or not any individual food or product is harmful is a bigger discussion. So the other gendered aspect of this debate, and I think I know that we're focusing on menopause, but it feels really important to say that, of course, it is women of all ages who bear the burden from this dietary pattern in two ways. First of all, diet and its effects on women are regarded in very different ways socially, but also it's women who if we are to shift away from this pattern, it's often commented that it will be women who bear the burden once again of preparing food in a different, often more laborious way. And so that's part of the discussion around, if we're going to say a dietary pattern of convenience industrial food is harmful, what does it mean to try and urge people to shift away from that? Who will pay for the increased cost? And by increased cost, we have to factor in the time, the equipment, the labor of shifting to a more minimally processed diet. And I think we have good evidence it may not be women. So those are the kind of factors that I think sort of come to bear on how we might think about diet and menopause.
And I think that you touched on so many pressure points there. I'm going to bring in Lauren at this point because the mental load, as you just sort of reflected on, is immense. So Lauren, I'm going to break my questions up into two parts with you. Off the back of what Chris has been saying, so the protein and everything, the fiber, you've got to eat yourself well out of your hot flushes. Your thoughts?
The theme that I certainly see on the internet is just an overall overcomplication of fitness in general, exercise and nutrition, that often encourages women to focus on the wrong things. So instead of worrying about the big picture items that matter, then we're focusing on, am I taking the right supplements? Or, let's worry about the difference between 1.3 and 1.5 grams per kilo of protein, when in reality, you can't even track it that well. Even if you were weighing everything, you're probably off by at least that much. So that's really the theme that I see. And I think historically, many of us come from a place of viewing dieting and food and exercise as tools for weight loss. So we have these discussions about, health or aging well or longevity, but sometimes that kind of inclination to really be super, super weight loss or fat loss focused is still there. It's still ingrained in so many women. And that does affect the decisions that I see being made, because it's sort of like, I know what I want to do, I know what I should do, but I'm so afraid of the scale weight changing that I'm actually not implementing some of those behaviors.
So I wanted to ask you then, because the internet and social media is rife, Lauren, and actually, Chris, I might actually get you to, both of you guys, to give us your sort of penny's worth on this. Eat this, don't eat that, cut out carbs, cut out this, exercise this, wear weighted vests, don't wear weighted vests. So Lauren, with all that contradiction, how do you sift out and have that critical thinking as just a woman in her 40s going towards perimenopause and menopause and trying to quieting down the noise, because I'm a 41-year-old perimenopausal woman, and even I find it very shouty and noisy.
I think generally the message that you must do this or you should never do that is the wrong message in really any context, unless we're going to say, you know, don't smoke or something that you clearly should never do. But when we think about the type of exercise, we have to remember the most important thing we can do from a physical activity perspective is any physical activity consistently and sustainably. So we need to make it way simpler and say, the number one thing you should do is what you will do regularly, long term, month after month, year after year, because that's what really, really moves the needle. That's what makes the difference. And so if we then go down to, well, you must be jumping up and down, or, you know, what are you doing? Of course, we can't make recommendations like that because they're inappropriate for certain women. And if it's giving you joint pain or if you hate it, those are great reasons not to do it. And the same thing goes for the cardio intensity that you're doing. You know, should we all be sprinting, or is zone 2 terrible for us? And all physical activity is good. None of it's bad. It's all good, including non-structured exercise, meaning hiking with friends, biking with friends. That's excellent as well. And so we really, really need to focus on that sustainable, consistent activity over time. But if we are going to focus on structured exercise, I highly, highly encourage some sort of resistance training, because we know that age-related muscle loss is a problem for men and for women. It's actually not about menopause. It's just about aging and inactivity. So if you can do any form of lifting, whether it's at home, whether it's at the gym, machines, free weights, it's all good. All rep ranges, all loads. It needs to be challenging. We want to do full body, and a minimum of 2 20-minute sessions per week can make a huge difference to your long-term health and physical function.
Chris, I can see you wanting to jump in there as well.
And let me unmute. I love that. I feel very inspired to do something rather than the nothing I usually do. Yeah, exactly. I mean, hiking in Hackney. I think the question around the confusion is so important. It's often said, there's no such thing as bad food. I'm not really sure I agree with that. There has been, for a very long time, I would say, going back to, if we look at nutritional guidance from all kinds of different governmental institutions, back to the 70s and the 80s, there's been great consistency about what a healthy diet looks like. And there is a huge volume of evidence around, we can all imagine the plate. It's very culturally specific. It can be very, very varied, but I think it is, if there is to be simplicity, it is saying there is a dietary pattern that we have a lot of evidence is harmful. But the trap, especially on a panel like this, and I'm desperate to do it, is to try and tell people what to eat, because everyone's here. And the question, as Lauren so elegantly puts it, is people are like, tell me what to eat to be healthy, by which I really mean how to lose weight. That's the subtext. And it's a trap, because I believe we have very good evidence that people eat the food they're forced to eat by their environment. It's the food that's marketed to them. And the role of personal responsibility, which is, of course, the implication of the second I go, people should eat this. I'm loading our audience with the responsibility to eat the healthy food. We know it's the food environment that determines diet. When people have money and access to healthy food, they broadly start eating it. And that's why we see such a gap between high and low income groups in terms of diet-related disease and quality of diet. So I think it is very simple. There's wide agreement on a good diet. There's very wide agreement on a bad diet too, on products and dietary patterns that are harmful. But what determines it is policy in the food environment.
Thank you for your pearls of wisdom. Now that we've sort of said what's good and what's not good, well, we've tried not to say that too much for menopausal stages of our life. The other things is going to be our brain and our sleep, because brain fog is the #1 symptom that brings patients into my practice. I'm going to hand over to my lovely co-host Joyce, who's going to unpick your sleep and your brain.
Thank you. And I've been answering a few of the questions that are in the Q&A. So just to encourage people, if you've got any questions, just put them in and we'll either type the answers or we'll bring some up for discussion at the end. I will bring up some of those topics. So please feel free. We definitely want to hear from you. So I'm going to go to Aimee. So Aimee, I did a survey, the first survey I did on menopause about 6-7 years ago. And my menopause doctors that I work with were very shocked because we asked women to tell us which possibles, we gave them a list of 52 actually possible menopause symptoms. And we said, what affects you? And they were very shocked that night sweats came out at number 10 and hot flushes came out at number 20. And my clinical friends said, no, hot flushes are the most common menopause symptoms. But what came out in between all those other symptoms were a variety of psychological or cognitive issues. So it was brain fog, anxiety, depression, and now they are on the table as absolute menopause symptoms. So can you tell us about that, Aimee? What's going on there with these issues that can affect women's mental health at this stage?
Yeah, really interesting question, Joyce. And I think back sort of a few years ago, we were very much focused on hot flushes and night sweats, weren't we? And we hear more and more. I keep hearing stories of people who really struggled with depression or anxiety. For myself, it was brain fog, and it wasn't linked to menopause, and we didn't really know how to make that connection. I'll briefly bring in my own experience because I think it's relevant here. You mentioned brain fog. So I have really struggled with it for quite a few years, about 10 years actually, and was very close about 4 years ago to going for some dementia testing, which is ironic given that my research focuses on dementia. And I hadn't even heard the term brain fog 4 years ago. Went to my GP several times, who also hadn't heard the term brain fog, didn't even think of asking me about my hormones, and I had no other symptoms. And I did eventually realise that it was menopause related. For me, hormone therapy did help. I could only take it temporarily, but I was really, really shocked about this lack of awareness. And when I looked at the research, I realised that all this work had been done, but it just hadn't got into the public domain. There wasn't the education. Doctors didn't know about it. Dementia specialists didn't know about it. So I think it's a really, really big thing. Move on to now, and we know that, as you say, and I think Nighat said as well, it's one of the main things that people are going to their doctors about. I think a lot of people are asking for assessments. I'm very lucky to be working with the group Menopause Mandate, who have just launched what they call their mega survey. So, and I'm helping do the analysis of that. And we've been looking at it this week. We've got data from over 15,000 women. And what's really interesting, brain fog comes out as the top symptom. So most people have about 11 symptoms that they report. 86% of the people in that survey said that they had brain fog. And then you compare it to hot flushes and night sweats, which come out at 53 and 54%. So really big difference. 68 reported low mood. 68%, sorry, 59% reported anxiety and panic. So we're very much seeing these psychological symptoms as higher than the physical symptoms. I mean, I suppose one note of caution is that mental health and awareness and disclosure has increased in all age groups for all genders. So that's a change that we're seeing, and we're also mindful that it can be a stressful life stage for men as well. And I think the other kind of word of caution really is that it's very easy to attribute all these things to menopause. That's it. So it's sort of both, it's sort of all or nothing, isn't it? Either nothing's attributed to menopause, or we're going the other way and saying, oh, I'm depressed because I'm going through the menopause. Many people thrive through menopause and are fine, but we do know that it's a period of vulnerability. Depression again is a big one. So we did a meta-analysis last year where we got data from 17 papers, gathering information from I think 7 different countries, and it was over 9,000 women. We combined their data, and what we found was that those who are perimenopausal, so people at the stage where your periods are fluctuating before you go through menopause, they were at the highest risk of having a diagnosis for depression or depressive symptoms compared to women at other life stages. And that was a nice study in the sense that it was also very, very diverse in the groups that we included, because there is a lot of discussion about whether symptom profiles differ across different ethnic groups. We don't know whether it's what's reported or whether symptoms actually are different. We know that age of menopause can be different. So this was a broad study. So what it concludes is that certainly perimenopausal women are at higher risk of depression, and we've repeated a similar study for anxiety as well. So absolutely, I think all these psychological symptoms are there.
Yeah, it's good that they're finally out on the table, and I do wonder, we can maybe come back to that, but I do wonder how much is the lifestyle that we're living now compared to our parents and our mothers and grandmothers. But I want to bring in Nerina. So Nerina, how we sleep can absolutely affect our psychological health and our mental health. And how can our sleep be affected by menopause? And do you think maybe that the way we're living our lives now is affecting those and having a knock-on effect with our sleep, and could lead to issues around those mental health issues?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. So if I sort of wind back about 30 years after my academic training and my postdoc at UCL, I ended up in a health screening laboratory in the city, in Moorgate, where I was head of physiology, running health screening assessments for people in the city, executive employees. And so that was back in the 90s. Keep doing timelines, but anyway, so back in the 90s. And I noticed that the physiology of these animals in my laboratory was becoming skewed. It wasn't what I expected. So I was seeing people in their 30s, in their 20s and 30s, the physiological parameters that I was measuring, it was skewed. And a lot of this was pointing to the escalation of technology and speed. Everything was speeding up. So this is back then, this is when I started getting interested in having conversations with people about stress and burnout and sleep. Because I also noticed that rather than asking a kind of tight-lipped investment banker, rather than asking them, how do you feel? I would say, how did you sleep? And I noticed that a lot of people wanted to talk about sleep. But I started paying attention to this, the whole sleep side of things, and wrote my first book, actually, Tired But Wired, because that's what a lot of people were describing to me, this feeling of being tired but wired. And then I noticed the impact it was having, more people talking about menopausal symptoms and experiencing this kind of tired but wired, difficulty getting to sleep, difficulty staying asleep. And particularly when I worked at the psychiatric clinic, the Capio Nightingale, so I worked there for 10 years running sleep and energy programs, I noticed that a lot of the patients, a lot of the women going in through perimenopause and menopause, and back then we weren't really talking about perimenopause and menopause, but I noticed that a lot of them were experiencing an increase in sleep problems, and even the kind of parasomnias, things like nightmares, night terrors, teeth grinding, restless leg syndrome, all of this sort of thing was becoming more prevalent, particularly during the menopause. And it was kind of like a chicken and egg, where if they weren't sleeping well, it was having an impact on their psychological health, and going into perimenopause and menopause was also impacting their sleep. But what I also noticed was that if I could help them to sleep better, it would start to address the mental health problems, the psychological issues, and it would help them to address the menopausal issues as well. And there's a reason why nature's designed us to spend a third of our lives sleeping. There's a kind of intelligence in that design, I believe. And time and again, I've worked with thousands of people over the years. I've noticed that if I can help them to sleep well, it starts to almost repair and heal their mental health, the brain fog, the hot flushes, the anxiety, and the depression. So sleep is kind of like a healing medicine in itself. So that's where my passion lies, really, in helping people to get that kind of sleep.
Perfect. And that's why the theme is for this year is lifestyle medicine. That's exactly
It really is medicine.
Yeah, it is medicine. I'm going to now go back to Aimee. I'm going to ask Aimee and Nerina about how we can improve this. So Aimee first, how can we help women improve their mental health during this stage of their lives in this crazy society we live in now, where we're bombarded by all these factors and stress that just make all this much worse? How can we improve it?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult question. I think we need lots of options. I think there's certainly no one size fits all. Education, so I'm really pleased about what you and Shema are doing, is just so important. So just thinking about brain fog, the number of people who've said to me, I wish I knew that I didn't have dementia, because actually knowing what's happening, understanding the symptoms, understanding what's going to happen is so important, because if we think we've got something else, you can really see how you can get yourself down this rabbit hole. I think and normalization and just having good support and things like that is really, really helpful. I think cognitive behavioral therapy is, I mean, I'm a psychologist, so I'm a little bit biased, but I think that, you know, it works really well with hormone therapy, for example. So Nerina will know more than this, but I think sleep's a really good example there. So it may be that the hormone therapy sorts out some of the biology, so you're not having the hot flashes, but you've already got into a very negative cycle at that point. You're already at in that pattern where you're waking up, even though you're not having the hot flashes, when you wake up, you panic and you think, oh, I'm not going to get back to sleep. And then you start worrying about absolutely everything. And that happens with everything that we do. So actually learning finding new ways to better associations between your thoughts and feelings and behavior is really good. There are other psychological therapies that have good evidence base. So mindfulness and meditation can be really, really helpful. Sometimes with cognition, I think really basic strategies are important. So one of the things that we're developing an intervention at the moment, one of the things we're really focusing on is attention. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, that my kids they drive me mad. I drive them mad as well, because they will say to me, I will say, what are you doing? Where are you going tonight? And they said, you've asked me that already. And have you got dementia? I mean, this is the normal conversation. And I think, I wasn't listening to the answer, because this is the problem. We don't actually, so it's not that I couldn't remember, but we can be doing far too much and our attention's bad. So I think there's lots and lots of strategies out there. I think the big problem is when people don't have treatment and support for these mental health problems, because we know that approximately 1 in 10 women leave work during the menopause transition. And it may be that 10 years later, their symptoms are better, but at that point, they've lost their confidence, they've lost their skill set, and it's very, very hard to get back on track.
Thank you, Amy. And we've got loads of questions coming in the Q&A, which is brilliant. I've been just reading through them. Nerina, just to you finally, before we move over to the Q&A. So how can we help menopause, perimenopausal women, or post-menopause, whatever stage of this life, improve their sleep?
Okay, I'm going to attempt to summarize 30 odd years worth of work, right, in a few minutes, because I've seen all the questions coming in, because it's another aspect to this as well. And I love what Amy said about, all these psychological strategies. CBT got a lot of time for that as well, because people's limiting beliefs, their perceptions about what should or shouldn't be happening about sleep, especially with all of the social media noise and biohacking. There's so much noise, and it's very confusing. So I think things like CBT can be very helpful. But I think education, really important part of it. I spend a lot of time dispelling myths and misconceptions. So many people, menopausal women, perimenopausal, come to me and say things like, my wearable says she's sporting an Oura ring. My wearable is saying this about my sleep. And or my Fitbit has just told me about I'm only getting so many hours of sleep, or I woke up so many times. So I spend a lot of time dispelling myths and saying things like, look, just forget how many hours you slept. How did you feel? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? Oh, you woke up during the night. Brilliant, you're normal. If we didn't wake up during the night, we'd be extinct as a species. We're meant to wake up during the night. That's normal. It's the behaviors you're indulging in, like checking the time, going on the dating sites and your social media and whatever. So, some of those things, stop doing them. And you're a good sleeper, so you can get away with just throwing all of this out of the window. I know about you and your sleep, so we're not using you as an example. But the other thing that can happen is that a lot of women at this stage of life there will be a kind of an imperfect storm of life events. You've got children growing up and becoming nightmares, and parents growing down and becoming nightmares. So you've got all of these crashing life events, plus the tsunami of hormones. So getting good support, understanding that your self-care, you really need to double down. You need to learn how to be restful. I have clients, I have women who I ban them from using the word sleep. We talk a lot about rest management. We talk a lot about softness. We talk about gentleness, being kinder to yourself. Self-compassion is a really important part of the mix as well. A lot of what I teach people about is how to manage the nervous system, understand the nervous system and regulate your nervous system. There's a reason why the National Institutes of Health calls this, they call the perimenopause a neurological transition state, because there's something that happens to your nervous system when you start going through perimenopause and menopause. So learning how to regulate and understand the workings of your nervous system becomes really important. And in my sleep methodology, the first step of my methodology is a kind of cleanup of the nervous system, you know, which includes how to understand the circadian rhythms, natural daylight, get your mobile phone away, not overindulging in caffeine, hydration. There's a little bit in there about nutrition as well, but just a few things that clean up the nervous system. Yep, exactly. And then we might start working deeper, and it might even call for some trauma management work. What I'm seeing a lot of these days, and I will shut up in a minute, but I'm very excited about this, is a lot of emerging late diagnosis. And I think a few people have put comments in about ADHD and autism, late diagnosis of neurodivergence. And I'm doing a lot of talking around that these days as well. So something happens in perimenopause and menopause where there's a sensitization of the nervous system. It becomes more sensitive. And now I'm probably sounding a bit woo-woo. I'm sitting here with all these... So
no, you're not.
But
You like woo-woo.
the nervous system becomes more sensitive. It starts reverberating and neurodivergence starts to surface and neurodivergent traits. So working with neurodivergence is really important and helping women to understand, you know, that mental health problems might start to escalate because they're becoming more sensitive and because they didn't realize that they've been going through their lives as a high functioning autistic or highly sensitive person. Anyway, that's a whole other subject, isn't it? We could talk for hours about that one.
Oh, we could absolutely. I'm going to come in really quickly before we head to the Q&As, because the Q&As are just, firstly, you guys are so brilliant in the Q&As. Keep asking these questions, because that's exactly what we want. I want to come back to Lauren, because off the back of what Nerina was saying about neurodivergence and other complex conditions, as well as just managing your perimenopause. So when it comes to nutrition and weight loss, and actually, Chris, I'm going to bring you in this as well, because women aren't just dealing with, say, perimenopausal symptoms. They're dealing with PCOS, adenomyosis, endometriosis, fibroids. So in regards to getting your life cycle and transition that's happening, dealing with these underlying chronic diseases, what are your thoughts about weight management at these sort of stages where you're going through other chronic disease managements as well?
So I don't think we can say there's evidence that you should be doing something differently. We know that excess body fat gained over the menopause transition is still responsive to a calorie deficit, for example. So I think often there's really a push to make it overcomplicated and say, you know, you have to do things differently, or you need an anti-inflammatory diet or a menopause diet, when really, if you want to lose body fat, you need to address how many calories you're eating, and you need to do that long term. And that is the biggest piece there. And then physical activity is important on top of that, because if we want improved body composition, meaning more muscle, less body fat, then we want to lift weights. And weight maintenance over time, physical activity in general is also very important for that. So you've lost the weight, now how are we going to keep it off? But it will come down to a calorie deficit, and it's not some sort of magic menopause diet, and that goes for everything else that you said in that category too.
Chris? Then we'll go to the questions.
I mean, now I'm going to do that man thing of like, yes, and I'm now going to re-explain everything Lauren just said so elegantly.
Don't do that.
I don't think I have anything much to add. You know, no one's cracked weight loss. It's extremely hard. Maybe I will re-emphasize what Lauren said first about exercise, which is you need to find that joyful thing that you don't hate, that you can keep going with. And I think weight loss is sort of the same thing. You need to get into some dietary pattern that is tolerable. But you know, the GLP, for many people, I think it is important to say there is now treatment. It is not flawless, but let's not forget the new GLP-1 drugs as well.
And I love that you said find something that you enjoy, because for me it was swimming, and then Joyce is still trying to get me to do cold water swimming with her, and that will happen. I promise you at some point. Shall we head into the Q&A and find out what's sort of swinging out there, because there's been a lot of noise in that area.
Yeah, I've got one. I've got one that I'd really like to, and I'm going to slightly edit it, which is something that's really been bugging me, and I've done a few little posts about it on Instagram. So people are going on now about cortisol spikes,
Oh,
and I wanted to add on there also for Chris and Lauren, probably especially the glucose spike. So you're not supposed to have a glucose spike, but I think you're anyway. So anything you want to say about the whole cortisol thing? So Lauren did she was on a great podcast the other day. I won't mention who her opponent was, but the opponent was someone that said, "Oh, women shouldn't exercise fasted." I exercise fasted every day because I wake up. My class is at 9:30 in the morning. I do high impact aerobics, so I exercise fasted. And so anyway, and this whole thing about cortisol and menopausal women shouldn't be doing high impact because they're going to release too much cortisol. Also, that we shouldn't be cold water swimming because it affects our cortisol. So who wants to say, probably Lauren and Chris, but anyone want to say anything about cortisol spikes, but also adding into that, the whole glucose spiking thing, and people trying to make pills to stop you having a glucose spike when you eat?
yeah, I just before Nerina said that really well. As a GP, I get so many of these. I've got this spike. My ring is telling me my heart rate's going up when I'm doing this. The tech that we now have to make the worried, the well worried is immense, and it comes through my GP doors. So it is having real world problems.
I mean, I'll just say very briefly, I'm not sure that there is any wearable tech around continuous glucose monitoring, that unless you have metabolic disease diagnosed by, a healthcare provider that you need, there's no evidence that the tight control of glucose, that it's possible, B, that the devices work, they're not calibrated for people who are well, and C, that there's any health benefit whatsoever to a low glycemic index diet, and there's any agreement between the devices. So I think if you are contemplating starting a program, a subscription service using a continuous glucose monitor, I would say that will be an expensive way of spending time compared to eating some healthy food.
Lauren?
Yeah, I think messaging like this is really weaponizing normal physiology and turning it into something that people will perceive as problematic, because the glucose insulin response to eating is what's supposed to happen when we consume food. And so with cortisol, it's really similar in that, cortisol is supposed to be highest in the morning when we wake up. That's just normal physiology. Prolonged fasting does increase cortisol. All exercise increases cortisol. And cortisol is actually a really important, it's involved not just as the stress hormone, but it's also involved in blood glucose regulation, blood pressure regulation, immune function. And so the idea that, this is bad, or it's something that we need to try to manually intervene and manipulate to bring it back down, we don't. It's well regulated in healthy people, and you never need to really think about it. It only becomes problematic if it's chronically low or chronically high, and then we have to address another underlying health concern. So in the vast majority of people who are worried about their cortisol, it's just that it's an unnecessary stress, and probably pitched to you by somebody who's trying to sell you a cortisol reducing supplement.
If anyone's selling you anything, stand back. Just please. We've just done an analysis of 201 menopause supplements. If it's got the word menopause on it and they're selling it, please just walk away. The evidence for almost all of that is going to be zero. Nerina, anything about cortisol or glucose on sleep? And someone's written, how can nutrition help?
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say something. This is based on not just my personal lived experience, but experience of working with a lot of people over the years. So I've done some pattern recognition on this. And I've noticed that if my clients, both genders, all genders, but particularly going through perimenopause and menopause, if they're having difficulty with the main sleep problems, difficulty getting to sleep, difficulty staying asleep, what can really help with that rush of anxiety that can hit first thing in the morning is eating a good nutrient-rich breakfast, not using caffeine as a substitute for food, right? So what happens when my clients and my patients and the psychiatric patients, when I started getting them to eat breakfast in the morning, nutrient-rich, protein, fat, carb, whatever, and for some of them, it was just eat anything, just break the fasted cycle. When they started eating, it started helping with their ability to get to sleep and stay asleep. So I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that one because that is one of my important, and I know we're not here to give people rules and be all kind of strict about it, but I have got 5 non-negotiables, and that's my top one, because what I noticed with a lot of women was that they would be skipping breakfast because they wake up in the morning because of their anxiety, they don't want to eat, but they're going for the caffeinated drinks. And that was making the cortisol spiking and the anxiety worse. So if there were sleep problems, eat in the morning. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I was just thinking. Yeah.
Nighat, we've got time for one last question. Did you want to pick anything out from the 27 that's on there? I've answered some of them. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, it's because my kids are making noise downstairs. But one of them I just wanted to answer very quickly. So I'll just give a 30-second answer to GLP-1s and progesterone absorption. GLP-1s, so that's Mounjaro, Wegovy, and Ozempic, anti-obesity medications. Some patients are on, but are safe to use alongside your HRT. If you're taking oral progesterone, then we can make adjustments in that in regards to make sure that the oral progesterone, such as Utrogestan, provides you endometrial protection, or consider alternatives to oral progesterone for your endometrial lining, such as a Mirena coil, or consider even a patch that has got both estrogen and progesterone on it. But the British Menopause Society have done a lot of advice on this. I've done a video breaking down the advice on this, so check that out. But please don't be worried that we're not thinking about GLP-1s and absorption. I also just have to slightly caveat with that is that it's not the most robust data that we have in regards to gastrostasis and absorption of medications. It's just a theoretical idea that we don't want to put women at risk of endometrial cancer, because obesity itself is a risk factor for endometrial cancer anyway. But I really wanted to have another question thrown at the panel as well, because all of us work with marginalised communities in some shape or form. I work around Slough, so I have a lot of Pakistani, South Asian, Indian, Black communities that I work with. And discussing menopause in these communities is really difficult, although I think I'm trying to change that a little bit in a smidgen way, and it is becoming a better conversation to have. When it comes to things like the most taboo stuff like mental health, or the Mediterranean diet always being suggested when you go to your NHS GP, it can feel sort of quite a frightening conversation, especially when you don't have a word. So there is no word for menopause in Punjabi and Urdu. The literal translation in Arabic for menopause is the age of despair. So that's your starting point straight away. So in that vein, do any of the panelists have experience for marginalised communities dealing with perimenopause and beyond? Aimee, I wanted to start with you, if that's okay on that one, because brain fog being the biggest symptom, I see a lot of South Asian women where they were like denied management or treatment because they didn't say hot flushes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what I mentioned before, I think there's certainly anecdotal reports that symptoms are potentially different, but actually I think some marginalized communities, and I suppose I don't want to generalize and everyone is different, but sometimes it's actually easier to talk about the physical symptoms as opposed to the mental health symptoms. So it can go both ways. Certainly in our work, we're translating a measure of cognitive function. We're actually working with a Chinese community as an example, and we've noticed there's some nuances in how people answer questions. So all the questions that we're giving people are developed in Western countries, and we're finding in those communities sometimes it's people don't want to say always or never because of superstition or because of concerns about what will happen if they say always. So there are these little kind of subtle things in terms of how we're asking people questions, and I think it's really obviously something that we really need to be thinking about in terms of treatment options.
Oh, thank you for highlighting that. That reminds me of a paper that was published in regards to PMDD, so premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which can worsen at perimenopause. And it was from the US in 2011. And the researchers concluded that at Stanford University, none of the Black students suffered or experienced PMDD because the questionnaire was set up in a very white Caucasian Western way. So when they asked Black students about mental health, they didn't want to be labeled with any stigmatization. So said, no, I never get these symptoms. So they concluded off the back of that questionnaire that Black women do not suffer from PMDD. So I think that is you've got to nitpick this sort of data. So in regards to marginalized communities and diet and exercise, how would you be able to navigate sort of what the work that, I mean, Chris, you highlighted about refugee communities.
Sorry, the muting. One of the difficulties with, for example, my asylum-seeking population is they're living on less than £10 a day very often. And so all discussion of healthy diet is entirely moot when you often eat uncooked food. So to some extent, there's this kind of food apartheid that we see growing. And Lauren, you've done great communication around this, but where at the one end we have people negotiating around the grams per kilo of a particular micronutrient and whether or not one supplement is better than another. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got this huge pool of people who are completely unable to access food and nutrition that will benefit them, and you know, and many other things about their life. So I mean, my reflection on this in a menopause context is the extent to which I myself as a clinician in this community simply don't ask about it. But one of the other reflections I have is that the vast majority of my asylum seeking population and migrants are men because of the nature of the migration and the displacement that's happened in the last few years. So I think it's a massively neglected area, and yeah, I have a sort of slight shame, I guess, to confess. But I always in these discussions I'll go back to clinical practice with something new for it. So I'm going to take something more than I'm going to give here.
Just to sort of let you know, we've been mapping all the grassroots organisations which have been working with refugee communities, and women, you know, with very little can do a lot, but these communities do come together. We are doing some work in that as regards to the women's health strategy. Lauren, one of the things I wanted to pick your brains about is because and this really irks me as well, but you know, I have I would say a very varied, rich Punjabi diet. And whenever I read anything when it comes to what diet should be good, it's always the Mediterranean diet. So I look at my Punjabi food full of garlic and ginger and go, what?
Yeah, I think there's also a big stigma about vegetarianism, which, you know, is obviously a big excludes a huge portion of the population, when in fact, although, you know, everyone agrees that protein is important, you know, vegetarian protein sources are just as effective when it comes to, you know, muscle growth and all of it. So I think we can be a lot more just socially aware, culturally aware in having those kinds of discussions. And I think you know, with exercise as well, making sure that women from all backgrounds have a place where they can exercise and feel comfortable and feel like they are they're doing something that in an environment that doesn't feel like the cultural awareness or lack thereof is actually taking away from the fitness experience.
And Nerina, will come to you about the psychological, because you mentioned earlier the best way to ask CEOs is about, you know, not their mental health. How do they sleep? So with your wealth of experience, how do you tease out those sort of mental health symptoms in, say, marginalized groups? And then we'll wrap up by saying goodbye, because for those of you hanging on, I just want to hear Nerina's like pearls of wisdom, and then because we have just run over 5 minutes, so I'm very, very sorry about that.
That's a really interesting question. I'm about to do some work with the UN, actually, with some marginalized groups. But what I'm doing, and again, this at the risk of sounding a little bit woo-woo or esoteric, is my belief is that if I want people to feel safe to open up about those things, I have to embody safety within myself. So I do a lot of work when I'm working with groups of people on feeling regulated in my own nervous system and safe, and being very present in the work that I'm doing. And I have found that that's the easiest way. It's the best way to get people into a place where they're feeling safe enough to talk about it. And to keep it simple, I share from my lived experience as well. I'm very open about my issues with insomnia, and the fact that I was hospitalized decades ago, and I saw that someone had mentioned about psychosis in there as well. So I share from that, and I think being very present in ourselves is the way to be the change, and it's the way to get people to feel safe enough to open up.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for everybody who joined us. Nearly 140 people logged on, so giving up your evening to be with us. And the questions are going to go on and on and on, but this is exactly what we wanted. I'm just going to wrap up and say thank you to our incredible panel. You have been utterly, utterly inspirational. And I'll let my other wonderful co-host, Joyce Harper, wrap this up, who actually got the panel together. So I can't take credit for this gorgeous panel, by the way.
Well, I am a bit of a fan club to our 4 panelists, as well as my co-host and Shema, of course. So I just wanted to thank you all. I do follow all of your work. If I will be emailing everyone tomorrow with a YouTube link once it finally uploads onto my YouTube, which takes hours in my terrible Wi-Fi. But I will share everyone's contact. I know someone's just told me they're not on Instagram, but these great panelists are, I think everyone's on Instagram, and I follow them, and I believe, they're the people I believe. You are all practicing evidence-based medicine. Chris, you have been so bold in your book. I couldn't believe how you called people out. It's very hard to call people out, and you are a very brave person. I haven't quite done it. And Lauren, I know you've called lots of people out as well. And it's unfortunate that we do have to do that. And I've got a podcast out today with Amanda Thebe called Navigating the Wild West of Menopause, because it is a Wild West. And none of us want it to be a battle, but we have to. We're not criticizing someone when we call out some myths. And Nerina, you mentioned myths, but there are lots of myths and misinformation out there. And I know that our panelists are all working hard to practice evidence-based medicine and to get the right information out there. And so please, can everyone support them? And I just want to thank them all again for giving up just over an hour of their evening and being involved with this great discussion for World Menopause Day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Such an honor.